So my name is Jennifer Dill. I'm a faculty member here in the School of Urban Studies and Planning, and along with my colleagues Rob Bertini and Chris Monsieur, we help co-organize this weekly transportation seminar. We are headed down to the end of the academic year. We have this week and next week left, so thank you all for coming. Before I introduce our speaker, I'm going to remind you, because we do webcast the seminars, we do have these microphones on most of the tables in front of you, and so that we ask, a couple tables are missing them, we do ask that if you ask a question, please use the microphone, hold the touch button, keep the red light lit while you're asking the question so the people who are watching on the web can hear your question. And we do have people watch regularly on the web, both live and archived. And I encourage you, we have about 2 or 3 years worth of seminars archived on the web, so you can go back and see some of our highlights if you'd like. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our speaker, who is Damon Fordham from ODOT. He's ODOT Sustainability Manager. Program manager. Sorry, I should have memorized that better. I was going to say coordinator, but and to talk about ODOT's sustainability program.
Good afternoon, I guess. Thanks for inviting me. It's great to come and talk with you here. To have the interest in what we're doing at ODOT for sustainability, and it's my pleasure to be here. Again, I'm the sustainability program manager for ODOT. My name's Damon. I just raced over here this morning from the convention center. There's an oil and water symposium going on. Some of you may have heard about big group of people looking at the current oil issues in the world, water issues, and how they affect Oregon and what Oregon's doing about it. So it's a really interesting group of folks there talking that I kind of raced over from, and I didn't stay for lunch, so if I faint from hunger or anything like that, just kind of pick me up and I'll keep going. So I've been at ODOT for a year or so, just over a year. It was a new position that was created, and I'm in the director's office. Some of you may know, if you know ODOT structure, there is 8 or 9 divisions, something like that. There's obviously the highway division, which is the biggest division, and most employees, the biggest budget. But then there's other divisions too. There's central services, which does the sort of internal support stuff. There is transportation development and data, motor carrier, which is the weight mile tax enforcement. There is transportation safety. There's a rail division, DMV, and public transit, and I think that's all of them. And then there's communications folks too. But the director's office is sort of the central folks in the central function in Salem, and I report to the chief of staff, who's, I guess you could call it sort of the director's right-hand person. And the reason I'm in that position is because the sustainability program, the purview of the program really is cross-divisional, all divisions, so it's not just the sort of internal support staff, it's not just highway, it's all divisions. And being there kind of allows me to look at all the different divisions within the organization. So just going around the audience, it looked like most of the people here are students, right, just from my knowledge, and then there's a few transportation professionals in the audience too. So, okay. So today I was trying to think about what I wanted to talk about and what would be of interest. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things that are going on within ODOT and the program we're developing, some of that more detailed stuff. But I always kind of enjoyed the broader discussion when I was a student, and just generally the more sort of bigger picture philosophical stuff. So I'm going to start with that a little bit. I'll do it first because I kind of think it's the more interesting stuff, and then if we run out of time, then so be it. But we'll do that first, broader big picture sustainability, and then move down to some of the things that are going on within ODOT. And if you have any questions, just shout at me, clarifying questions. If it's a bigger, more in-depth thing, we can have a discussion at the end. So what I wanted to do, first of all, and we'll see if this works with the technology here, but just do kind of an icebreaker thing, make sure everyone's awake. And also because you guys have, you guys are a good resource base for me and good experience and have good knowledge. So what I want to do is ask a question. I'm going to make some notes, and then we'll see how it compares to some of the things I've been thinking about. So what comes to mind when you think about transportation and sustainability? So I'm going to sort of just assume everyone has a rudimentary understanding of sustainability. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But what kind of things come to mind when you're thinking, okay, transportation system, sustainability, either challenges that we have to face or opportunities that we have? And I'm going to try and write down here, and if it doesn't work, just shout. Oh, yeah, and remember to use the microphone, right. I thought you were talking to me. I was like, I've been talking for 5 minutes. Okay, so, right, one at the back.
The decision to use BRT versus LRT.
Okay. Let's expand on the acronyms, just for the people that don't know acronyms.
Okay, so bus rapid transit versus light rail transit.
Okay. So, bus, rapid transit versus rail. Okay, how is that? Okay. Any others? Just kind of brainstorming stuff. Yeah.
I would just say generally trying to use the automobile less.
Okay, so reduce car use. Okay, yeah, Lidwin.
Storm drainage.
So this was a risk for me doing this because I've got my own list, right? And it's going to completely show me up if I don't have all this on here. So we'll see. Storm drainage. Okay. Yeah.
Trip chaining, if you are using the car.
Okay. Yeah.
Building materials.
Okay, materials. Yeah.
Land use effects of transportation.
Okay. There was another one.
That was the same.
Same one?
Land utilization, basically.
Jennifer.
About habitat protection.
Okay, habitat. There must be some more out there. Okay.
Well, I would think more like long-term energy planning.
Like for how the transportation
You know,
system is
yeah,
powered?
basically fossil fuel versus other energy sources for transportation.
That should be term, but you know what I mean. So long-term energy planning. Okay. There was another one right there. Yeah?
About like operations of administrative, I mean, just the whole structure of the office and I guess internal operations, like
Of ODOT?
Yeah.
Or of, okay.
recycling.
Okay. Yeah.
Air quality and emissions.
Am I running out of, okay, you can still see, okay. Yeah.
Trying to accommodate the bike transit.
Okay, so bike integration. Jennifer, did you have one? No?
This kind of deals with some of the others, but total energy analysis.
Couple more? Yeah.
Mode choice.
Okay, modal choice. Yeah.
Like green streets, like street trees and permeable concrete.
Great. Okay, unless anyone has any. Is there one left? One more?
I don't know the right word. Life cycle cost estimating.
Okay.
You know what I mean by that?
Yeah, absolutely. So sometimes it's LC, AA, sometimes. Okay, great. Well, we'll come back to that in a second. It's a great list. Thank you. It's like a control station up here. Okay, so just to talk broadly, move away from the transportation piece and just kind of open it back a little bit. What is sustainability in general? And when I talk to people about this, I never really know whether people have, a really good understanding of what sustainability is, or whether it's a word that they don't have, have never heard of. So, just sort of straw poll. How many people kind of think they know generally what this term sustainability means and what it gets to? So most people, like maybe 3/4 of the room. So there is sort of a general accepted definition of sustainability. This is from Oregon statute, ORS 184.421. So essentially using, developing, and protecting resources in a manner that meets current needs but also enables future generations to meet their needs, thinking about these three perspectives: environmental, economic, and community. So it's a pretty broad definition, and it sounds great, and everyone goes, yeah, that's what we should do, but it's hard to kind of really get into it and know how to proceed from that. So fundamentally, really, it's a quality of life issue. How do we preserve quality of life right now and for future generations? The problem is that what we think of as our quality of life is really based on some assumptions. It's based on assumptions of resource availability and based on assumptions of ability of nature to absorb our waste products. And so when we start thinking about those assumptions, that's when the problems start to appear. During this last industrial period, when we've improved quality of life, generally what we've done is expanded the economy, usually through manufacturing production, originally, production of goods. And so that sort of inherently was some resource use and some production of waste. This is an early manufacturing facility. And we essentially moved from a society where it was more agricultural based in the agricultural era, and we were harvesting energy in real time, either from animals or from the wind or from just growing crops or growing wood for fuel, and moved to an era where we were using energy that had been stored. Initially coal in the early days of the industrial era, but then more and more oil. This is an early oil, what do you call it, derrick or rig or whatever, from Louisiana, I think. And so we started to extract this energy and found that it was very energy dense, extract this oil and found that it was very energy dense, and we could do a lot with it. And as our society increased in complexity and in scale over time, our need for energy increased, and we are now in a position where we're using a lot of oil, and we have a huge oil industry, and we're refining it, and we have a society that's really based on this availability of oil. So that results in a great quality of life, right? I stole this slide from someone else. But, we can drive around, we have jobs, we commute, we go to the beach, we recreate, we visit people, and it's a good quality of life. But really, we can't keep going on with business as usual in that way. We live in this closed system. We live on spaceship Earth. We have one energy input, essentially, to the world, which is solar, and little ability of waste products to escape. And this major resource that we depend on, oil, is finite. It's this stored mass in the ground, and we're pulling it out. And we're going to start to bump up against the problems of doing so very shortly. World population is expanding exponentially. This is information from the U.S. Census Bureau with kind of, obviously not all of this data is measured, but it's their prediction of how human population has grown from year zero. And right now we're at 6.5 billion people globally, and we're growing at a rate of 1 billion people every decade. So if you compare that, if you talk to biologists and you compare that to biological systems that grow exponentially in a closed environment without predation, always crash. There's always some kind of crash in the health of the population. It's a basic biological reality, and it's true for bacteria in petri dishes, it's true for algae in ponds, and it's also true for reindeer. This is an example from St. Matthew's Island, which is in the Bering Sea, and kind of an interesting little case study. St. Matthew's Island is a 128 square mile island in the Bering Sea Wildlife Refuge. And in 1944, I think it was to do with World War II operations, some Coast Guard folks were stationed down there, and they placed 29 reindeer on the island as a sort of an emergency food source for these guys. If they couldn't get supply drops in, they would have reindeer to eat. Well, what happened was this island was covered in this 4-inch thick mat of lichen, and it was like reindeer nirvana. And the reindeer just went crazy, and by the summer of 1963, there were 6,000 reindeer on the island. No predation and plenty of food. Well, that winter, there was a severe winter, and the following year, the population crashed and went down to about 50 animals. So, eventually that system couldn't be sustained. There was a crash because the population had overstepped the carrying capacity of the island. And, the same growth trend is what we see in the world's population. So whether the human population undergoes some kind of crash like that, which is a scary thought, or whether we can find some kind of stable carrying capacity, which may or may not be possible, kind of depends on us figuring out the consequences of what we're currently doing and modifying our behavior so that we can avoid or mitigate that crash. So it's essentially about continuing to think about quality of life and improving it, but also thinking about the future, and also doing so in a way that ensures equity among the world's population and equity of resource use in all different regions of the world. So typically in sustainability and in sustainable development, we think of three kind of legs of the stool: the environmental piece, the social or community piece, and the economic piece. And all of them are equally important, and sustainability isn't just about the environment or about communities. It's also about maintaining good economic vibrancy. Another way to think about these is as capital. So we know the concept of economic capital, cash, finance, but there's also capital in society, in communities. There's community capital that can be built, and there's also environmental capital, the goods and services that natural resources provide us. And in business, you may have heard the term triple bottom line is what this is being called. So instead of just looking at that economic bottom line, also looking at the other two pieces and referring to that as the triple bottom line. So kind of a better model, I think, of looking at it, instead of three separate pieces, is to think of it as more integrated sort of concentric rings. If we think about the economy as this trading of goods and services, these financial transactions, in order to have that needs to exist within a bigger context, which is this sort of social context. And without jobs, without housing, without transportation systems, without sort of functioning communities, we wouldn't have those economic activities. And those communities, those social structures exist within this bigger picture, which is the environment, the world as a whole, and the services that nature provides. And you read someone like Herman Daly, he talks about the environment not being a minor factor of production, a resource which it may have been thought of traditionally, but rather an envelope containing, provisioning, and sustaining the entire economy. And in fact, now people are starting to think about the environment as maybe the limiting factor to future economic development being this availability of natural capital, natural resources. So just some characteristics of sustainability to sum up. It's this long-term view. It's talking about things in terms of lifetimes, generations, rather than just sort of a year or 2 year or 10-year planning cycle. It's this broad concept that incorporates these three different elements. It's fundamentally global. When you're talking about sustainability, really we're talking about the ability of the world to be able to be sustained. So it's this global concept, but we enact it locally with the decisions we make. It's a complex, interrelated systems view of the world. And so instead of viewing the world in a sort of siloed way that we may have done, that we do in our academic institutions, we each choose a discipline and study it, become experts in it, rather than doing that, looking at the world in a more systemic, holistic way, where maybe the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. And I like to think of it as a considered process rather than an end state. So rather than saying, how do we make our transportation system sustainable? Well, that's a harder question, but if we think about the decisions we make through time as this process, this journey, moving towards this sort of ideal state, that's an easier way to think about it. So kind of a decision-making process rather than an end state we have to get to. So sustainability in transportation, I wanted to talk a little bit about, I've done some reading, not a whole ton of reading on this topic, but just to share with you some of the things I've read and the conclusions I've come to about this sort of term, sustainable transportation. I personally sort of think it's an oxymoron. I mean, it's probably a good ideal end state to aim towards, this sustainable transportation term, but each system in the world I don't think has to be sustainable within itself. We don't have to make every single car carbon neutral, for example, but maybe we plant 10 trees for every car we make or something to offset the carbon emissions from the vehicle. So the trade-offs between the processes, that's part of this systemic, holistic view of the world, enables the different processes going on in the world to interact and then create this sustainable world in a global sense. So, I don't necessarily like the term sustainable transportation, but I think it's useful for us to conceptualize and to think about this sort of ideal end state. So I'm going to compare what I've got here to some of the lists that we've come up with and see what I've left out and forgotten about. First of all, I just want to kind of look at challenges, and then we'll look at kind of more of the objectives or goals that a sustainable transportation system might move towards. So these are just kind of some of the big picture challenges that I think ODOT is facing, but probably other transportation agencies face, other countries are facing. This sort of growing need to respond to environmental pressures, environmental concerns, even talk now of trying to be restorative for the environment in transportation system design instead of just not damaging it. And so that's a challenge because that can be either a good thing or a bad thing depending on your point of view. If you just want to build the road and get the road built, then it's probably a pain to have to deal with these kind of environmental pressures. If you're an environmental activist that wants to make sure that a watershed doesn't get damaged, then having a transportation agency respond more proactively to those pressures is a good thing. So it's sort of, it's not really a good or bad thing, but it's a challenge because as an agency, if we're spending more resources and having to spend more time addressing those things, then it's inherently a challenge. More of a need for responsiveness to community concerns. I think ODOT is arguably doing more now than it's ever done to be responsive to community concerns, to get public involvement, and to create solutions that respond to the needs that communities have rather than just putting something in place which is the best thing that an engineer or someone else might think is the best thing to put in place. Again, there's challenges in that because it takes time and money to do a lot of public involvement and to go through that process. Uncertainty in revenues. I think transportation needs these days are outweighing available funds, and also the purchasing power of the funds we have. Our revenue stream is the gas tax, which hasn't been increased in straw poll. Anyone know? I'm looking at Jennifer. Is it 12 years? Something like. So, the gas tax hasn't increased, so it's not keeping up with inflation, and the purchasing power is decreasing. And also, we may not have seen this quite yet, but we're predicting that we're going to see it in the future, is that we're going to see more and more fuel-efficient vehicles. And so as a vehicle becomes more fuel-efficient, you can essentially drive a further distance on the road or do more damage to the road system for the same price. So that's a reduction in purchasing power of our revenue stream. So that's a challenge. A growing and aging population. In Oregon, we're seeing a rapidly growing population here, above average for the United States, and also an aging population. And an aging population has different transportation needs and will put more pressure on alternative modes like transit. Global warming is a big challenge that we're starting to talk about within the agency. And I kind of think about global warming as having these sort of big picture macro level impacts and also more kind of tangible micro impacts. So what I mean by that, on this sort of big picture macro level impacts, well, maybe we're going to see in Oregon in the next 20 years an even more rapidly growing population because we're seeing immigration from places like, say, Arizona, folks moving here because it's getting too hot to live comfortably down there. Maybe we're going to see a need for the transportation agency to become more of an advocate for, let's say, limiting driving or less emitting vehicles, taking more of an advocacy role that we may have not had before. And on those more micro level, the sort of tangible impacts of global warming, maybe we need to relocate a highway facility if the sea level is rising or there's encroachment on some of the roads we have, 101 or others. Or maybe we have to start resizing some of our stormwater facilities because we're seeing more extreme hydrologic events. And interesting point that I hadn't thought about before at this workshop, the seminar I was at this morning, the hydrologic science is based on this historical record, right? So we look back over 100 years or so, we see storm events, flood data, we get that, we know, we do statistical analysis and we figure out, okay, what's the likelihood of a certain storm? We design for a 100-year flood or whatever. Well, if the trends are changing inherently due to climate change and we're getting more extreme events, that record is no longer correct, and what we're basing our designs on isn't a correct assumption anymore. It's really an interesting point, and it could have significant impacts. Finally, challenge, peaking of world oil supplies. So you've probably heard of this term. I think there's even been some speakers that have talked about this, but sometime in the next 25 years, as a conservative estimate, if not before or if not already, we're going to see peaking of world oil production. And that doesn't mean that we're running out of oil. It just means that we're in the halfway point of extracting producing all the oil in the world. And after we get over that halfway point, that hump, that peak, then there's going to be more uncertainty in oil supplies and uncertainty in the price, and that's going to have impacts for us. We may be seeing more modal shifts, more demand from people for different kinds of modes. We'll probably see revenue impacts if people are driving less and we're not getting the gas tax monies. We're going to definitely see increased cost of construction materials. We're already seeing that. The cost of products that we use to construct the highway system. So a lot of impacts from that. So those are kind of some of the big picture challenges I see, and each of those in itself is a huge topic to think about. So it's kind of in response to those challenges is this thought of a sustainable transportation system. And I've got a list of bullet points here, and I'm just going to kind of run through them, and hopefully some of the things we've got on our list over here. This is just my informal list. It's kind of results of some of the reading I've done, and it's not something that ODOT's necessarily bought into or is going to strive towards, and they're not in any particular order in themselves. And it's sort of a big picture. Each one of these bullets has a number of elements to take from and to work on. So just to kind of run through these, I think it's pretty interesting. If we're talking about a sustainable transportation system, what do we strive to do? Well, reinforce livable and economically strong communities. So make sure that the transportation system really enhances communities rather than detract from them. I'm going to go through this kind of quickly because I've got 15 points and I don't want to spend a lot of time talking about them, but it's useful. So modal choice, that came up, I think. Make sure that we have modal choice for folks. Efficient land use that reduce travel distances and increase travel options. So that kind of smart growth piece, the land use planning piece, that came up from our list earlier. Distribution of system benefits and burdens equitably across society. So that's that kind of environmental justice piece of the picture, making sure that we're not benefiting certain groups overly or causing other groups to have an unfair share of the burdens. Encouraging pricing that reflects true costs. So, does our single car lifestyle really, what we pay for that, really reflect the true costs of it? And other things that we can do to help sort of reflect some of those costs in the price that people pay to move around. Reducing emissions of greenhouse gases, so that's the climate change piece. I don't know if that came up explicitly earlier from our discussion. Maybe the air quality emissions was mentioned. Protection of local air quality and water quality. So that's more of the kind of the local impacts, urban air quality, for example, stream, aquatic, water quality. Transitioning away from these non-renewable fuels that we're dependent on to cleaner and renewable alternative fuels. We talked about this one, I think, native habitats and species, making sure that what we're building and how we build it and how we maintain it is compatible with the landscape that it's placed on. Applying life cycle costs to transportation investments, that came up. This concept of not just thinking about the initial first cost of a decision, but thinking about the life cycle costs. What are the costs during its life, during use of that facility? And what are the costs at the end of the life if we're disposing of the facility or reusing it somehow? Material use came up earlier. Minimizing raw material use and disposal during construction and maintenance. So either reusing materials or using materials that don't have such an impact from where they're procured. Improving safety. Some people kind of don't make the link between safety and sustainability, but I like to say that if we design and build and are responsible for a transportation system that injures and kills its users, then that's not a sustainable system. Prioritizing accessibility over mobility, where appropriate. And that's kind of a nuanced point, but I think it's important, this concept of, people don't really inherently want to move around particularly, unless certain things like going for a Sunday drive or something, maybe you want to, or going for a bike ride, going for a walk. But typically you want access to goods or services or activities, destinations. You want to do something. It's an access piece. The mobility piece, the people physically moving around, isn't actually what you're striving towards. It's not the goal. It's the means to the access, which is the end goal. So where appropriate, it's not always appropriate. It's maybe more of something that you could prioritize in an urban area rather than a rural area. But this concept of access over mobility is really key, I think. Minimizing noise impacts to communities and natural areas. So the impact that the transportation system has on wildlife, but also on communities if an interstate runs through a community and there's adverse noise impacts. And finally, finding a way to fund the transportation system with sustainable revenue streams that are publicly accepted, so people buy into the fact that they're paying this tax or whatever it is and getting a benefit from it. And the beneficiary pays concept, which is precisely that. People are seeing that there's a benefit, and so they pay the price. And those who benefit from the system pay for the system. So those are my kind of 15 bullet points, which is an aggregate of some of the things I've read. And again, that's a kind of idealized end state, something we might strive towards. It's not something we're going to get to tomorrow, and it's not necessarily something that ODOT is brought into saying, yeah, we're going to work on this. Some of the things, yes, we have. Other things are certainly more of a stretch, would be more of a stretch for the agency. So that's kind of the broad, big picture style. That's the stuff I like to think about. But it's, it is sort of abstract and philosophical, and sooner or later you have to get down and actually do something. So we're going to talk a little bit more about the specifics of what's going on at ODOT and how we're incorporating sustainability. So there's three reasons, really, why ODOT cares about sustainability. One reason is it's the law, and it's in Oregon statute. It's in ORS 184.421, which is the Oregon Sustainability Act, which was passed in 2001, and it did a number of things. It gave 10 objectives for agencies to incorporate sustainability just in how they operate. But it also gave 10 objectives for state agencies to encourage sustainability in local communities. And that's what I've pulled up here. This is the first 5 of those 10. And they're not all relevant to ODOT. They're sort of broad. They're supposedly relevant for all different agencies. But the things I've underlined are the pieces that certainly are relevant to ODOT. So as an agency, we should encourage resilient local communities. We should encourage a diversity of economic opportunities. I'll skip the ones that aren't so relevant. We should encourage downtowns and Main Street communities that are active, that are vital. And the last 5, development that wisely and efficiently uses infrastructure investments and natural resources, healthy urban and rural watersheds, and efficient use of resources and minimization of emissions. And that is law, in that's what we should strive to do in Oregon. This ORS, this statute, also created an overall board for sustainability in the state, the Oregon Sustainability Board. It was originally, I think, a 7 or 8 member board at the state level. It's now grown to an 11-member board, and it's chaired by Bill Bradbury, who is the Secretary of State. So it's a high-level group. They don't have a budget or a staff, but they do have other assets that they can draw on, and they have a lot of influence in state government. So along with that statute that was in 2001, there's been a history of executive orders on sustainability. First of all, John Kidsopper in 2000, Executive Order 0007, it was the initial kind of foray into directing agencies to look at sustainability. It encouraged sustainability in state government operations, and it provided some practice for DAS. And DAS is the Department of Administrative Services, which is sort of central agency that does things like all the kind of support functions. You know, they manage the fleets, they manage some buildings, they do a lot of other things too. But so DAS is that sort of main support agency. And then in 2003, so that's a couple of years after the Oregon Sustainability Act was enacted, Governor Kulongoski issued Executive Order 03, Sustainable Oregon for the 21st Century, and that supported that Sustainability Act language, the statute language. It directed the board to provide some more specific guidance to state agencies, and it also designated 20 of the biggest state agencies to write a sustainability plan, to have a sustainability coordinator on staff to organize sustainability activities, and it gave some actually quite specific initiatives that the governor wanted different agencies to work on. So that was kind of the impetus, the early impetus for really having agencies start working forcefully on sustainability. And then recently, in January of this year, Executive Order 0602 was enacted, and that reauthorizes the Oregon Sustainability Board, which had sunsetted, and kind of reaffirmed the agency sustainability planning process, and it gave some new specific obligations to agencies to work on things like procurement, electronic waste, fleet, greenhouse gas emissions, energy, that kind of thing. And it also started to look at the private sector, how state government could work with the private sector in sustainability, and also the university system. And it rescinded the other executive order. That's why they're crossed out. So there's been this history of executive orders, there's statutes, so it is in law, and it has got some basis for directing agencies to work on sustainability. But a second reason, I think, is that it's just inherently part of our role as a state agency. It's in our mission language. If you look at ODOT's mission, providing a safe, efficient transportation system, supporting economic activity, opportunity, and livable communities. So it's in our mission already, that language. You know, there's parallels there with this sort of triple bottom line. And inherently, people know, I think, that if we're spending public money, we shouldn't be spending it on things that are detrimental to the quality of life for the citizens. And the third way, and some people buy into this, some people don't, but I think if you address sustainability well, if you take this systems view, if you think about the life cycle, then I think over time it does typically work out to be a cost-effective and efficient way of doing business. I think initially certain decisions may appear more expensive, the upfront capital costs may be more expensive, but that's probably just an indication that either you're ignoring or externalizing certain parameters, or you're not thinking broadly about this life cycle perspective. So those are kind of three reasons, I think, why ODOT cares and why we're coming to care more and more about this issue. And we're seeing good leadership support from ODOT's leadership for sustainability. Matt Garrett, ODOT's director, sent an email to all staff shortly after the last executive order was issued, affirming what I'm working on, the sustainability program, saying that he supports it, and recognizing that if we work on this program, it's really going to help ODOT be one of the most proactive and progressive DOTs in the nation and maintain that position. So just to talk about some of the things we've done to date, after the 2003 executive order, ODOT wrote a sustainability plan which was adopted by the board in March of 2004, and in that plan, there it is. It's still in place. It's kind of out of date now, and what I'm working on is working to update this plan. But the things that are in it are still relevant right now. So there was three kind of main goals. The first goal in that sustainability plan was incorporating sustainability into the update of the Oregon Transportation Plan. And I think you've had speakers here before talking about the Oregon Transportation Plan. The Oregon Transportation Plan is this sort of overarching policy document setting the policy and vision for the state's transportation system. The last one, I think, came out in '92. We're now doing this update process, and it's a big process, lots of stakeholder engagement, high-level folks involved in writing it. And it's just about to become, sometime this summer, it's going to go through the commission, the Oregon Transportation Commission, and be adopted. Anyway, in this Oregon Transportation Plan, there's 7 main goals. The 4th goal is explicitly about sustainability. It's called sustainability. So of those 7 goals, one of them is talking about sustainability. So I think that's a big deal just in itself, that as a transportation agency, we have this highest level document, policy document that we have, has sustainability right up there. So it's talking about, meeting current needs, also thinking about future needs, talking about a system which is efficient, offering a choice between modes, distributing benefits and burdens fairly, and being operated, maintained, and improved to be sensitive to the natural and built environments. And there's policy language underneath that goal, and there's actual strategies underneath that goal to address the 3 pieces of sustainability: environment, community, and economics. The second part of that 2004 sustainability plan was incorporating sustainability into the OTIA 3 bridge program. So a lot of you probably know the OTIA 3 bridge program is this big $1.3 billion program to repair or replace about 300 or 400 of the state's aging bridges. And so the approach that's been taken is this CS3 approach, context-sensitive and sustainable solutions. In this program of bridge repair and replacement, we're going to use this approach to be sensitive to the context and to try and incorporate sustainability. So a number of things, I'll just move through this quickly. We talk about stimulating the economy, using the bridge program to stimulate Oregon's economy. 95% of the spending in 2005 on the program went to Oregon-based firms, and it's expected that the program over its life will sustain about 3,100 jobs. Training a diverse and sustainable construction workforce through things like apprenticeships and providing opportunities for minority groups and for women. Making sure that we deliver the program efficiently and cost effectively, and one of the ways that that's been done is through streamlined environmental permitting, so doing what they're calling programmatic permitting rather than individual permitting for each bridge, getting permits done for the whole program where possible, and really streamlining that process, working much more collaboratively with the resource agencies and the regulatory folks to spend less money on the sort of paperwork and the process and make sure that we're getting good environmental outcomes, but we're doing it efficiently. The maintaining mobility was a big goal, and they took this approach of a corridor planning rather than sort of a worst first approach. So all the bridges along a certain corridor would be fixed. Then that corridor would be opened to traffic. To obviously the freight is the sort of limiting factor on bridge design, and then another corridor would be worked on. So taking this corridor approach, maintaining mobility, which is critical for the state's economy. And sensitivity to communities and landscapes, so making sure that as we're repairing and replacing these bridges, we're doing so in a way that doesn't detriment communities and doesn't detriment the natural environment, doing things like mitigation banking. Excuse me. So any mitigation, environmental mitigation that we have to do on a site, instead of just doing these sort of parcels of mitigation, an acre here, an acre there, adjacent to a site, taking a holistic approach and mitigating with these banks so that you're actually putting the effort and the time into creating a bigger wetland or whatever it is you're working on that has more chance of success, that's easier to maintain, and is more likely to function naturally than to need sort of continued maintenance. Context mapping was something that was done. Each bridge site was mapped. The data was taken, environmental data and other data, and that was used sort of proactively in the design process rather than doing a design and then figuring out how it was going to impact what was on the ground. And the third piece of this 2004 sustainability plan was writing an environmental management system, an EMS, for our maintenance yards. So we have these yards around the state where our equipment is located, our field guys are located. They're the guys that are out trimming the grass on the side of the roads, cleaning the culverts, plowing the roads, all of that kind of thing. And in each of those yards, they have certain materials. Some of them are hazardous. And so having an EMS that gave some best management practices for how we store those materials, how we use the materials, and how we dispose of them, has had really huge impacts. And it's actually been very well received by the guys out on the ground. It's been rolled out, I don't think to every single yard yet, but to something like maybe a third of our yards. And it's just providing a really structured framework for them to just manage the yards better and get rid of stuff that they don't use very much or that they don't need, label containers better, use materials, safer materials, perhaps alternatives to things they've traditionally used, and just make the yard a better place to work in. So I wish I had more photos, but I got a couple of before and after pictures. Just, this is an example, an area that's tidied up, things are labeled, the stuff that's not needed is got rid of, and it's just a better site. Another one, some diesel, used oil tanks moved away from the perimeter, put in a safer position, labeled well. And so that kind of thing is happening at these yards around the state. So those are just the three main parts of the sustainability plan, and since I came, those were happening, put in place before I came on board. Since I came on board a year or so ago, been involved in some other things that I think are interesting to talk about. Our fleet has been really proactive about looking at alternative fuels. First of all, biodiesel. The governor has some goals for biodiesel use in state agencies. And our fleet guys have been really great about responding proactively to that challenge and looking at how we can use more biodiesel. So I think currently out of our total use statewide of diesel, so our total diesel use statewide, all of the diesel we use, about 7% of that is B20, which is a blend of 20% biodiesel and 80% regular diesel. And so there's benefits of that. There's emissions benefits, it's lower emissions. It's an industry that's more local, domestic, that we're helping to stimulate. The emissions piece, is better for our guys that are working around equipment. It's better for the communities that the equipment's driving through. So it's really a great thing. Ethanol, we have about 45 ethanol sedans out of our fleet of, I think we have about 220 sedans in our fleet, and about 45 of those are ethanol. E85, which is this sort of flex for fuel concept, they can use either an 85% ethanol blend or they can use regular gasoline. Problem with that is that there isn't a lot of places around the state to refuel them with ethanol right now, but there is the main motor pool in Salem does have an ethanol pump, so those vehicles that are being used in Salem can be refueled there. And actually, Matt Garrett, our director, has a flex fuel Ford Taurus, and he apparently does use the ethanol pump in Salem and fill it up. When he needs to fill it up, he fills it up with ethanol. So that's great leadership and something that, along with these other things, is making a difference. Finally, hybrids. We have a number of Priuses. We have, I think, 3 Priuses right now, but we have 5 on order, so we're going to have 8 Priuses in our fleet shortly here. And obviously, they have good impacts and people like driving them. They're well received. DAS, as I mentioned, the Department of Administrative Services, they have a bigger fleet than us. We're a big agency, so we have quite a big fleet. Other agencies, the smaller agencies, don't have any fleet, so they use the DAS vehicles. And DAS has a lot of hybrids in their fleet. They have ethanol vehicles too, and the Priuses are the most popular vehicles they have. State employees, they really like to check the Priuses out and use them, and they like how they perform. And so we're just going to kind of see more and more of this happening, I think. Another thing I wanted to touch base briefly about, our building in Salem, this is the Transportation building, was built in 1950 or so. It's the last building on the mall that hasn't been seismically retrofitted. It's got window air conditioning units. It's just kind of in need of an overhaul. But historically, we haven't been able to get the funding to do that because there's always this pressure to spend monies on the highway system and on asphalt instead of on a support function of upgrading a building. So what we tried to do was we did this study to say, okay, not doing anything, how much is that really costing us over the life cycle? Taking this life cycle costing approach, if we don't do anything, what's the real cost of that over, say, the next 20 or 40 years? If we just did a renovation to a market rate scenario, what's the cost of that over that life cycle? What if we did a really high-end renovation and we incorporated some really high performance features, some really good energy efficiency, things that would make the building a more pleasant place to work in? Maybe we'd get some productivity improvements from staff because they're not sweating in the summer and cool in the winter. what are the impacts on that? And what we found was that that scenario where we did the high-end stuff, it was much more expensive initially, but over the even over 20 years, was by far the most cost-effective option in terms of net present value in real terms. So doing that kind of analysis that we wouldn't have typically done before, saying, yeah, it's more expensive to do that right now, but this is how much the state's going to save over the next 20 years, is key to being able to make those decisions, I think. And this finally another example of some things I'm working on. The Oregon Solutions process is this sort of public, private, non-profit, collaborative process of finding solutions to problems. This particular project is called the North Portland Diesel Emissions Reduction Project, and it's looking at ways that ODOT, along with other people in that community, can reduce diesel emissions. It's being led by ODOT and by DEQ because of the work we're doing on the I-5 Delta Park project. But really just kind of sitting down with everyone and saying, okay, what are our impacts from our diesel emissions? What can we do to do a better job? Getting all the people, the players around the table, working collaboratively, the biodiesel suppliers, the waste haulers, garbage truck folks, the PG&E who go out and fix the electricity lines, whoever it is, and just coming up with this sort of voluntary commitment list saying, yeah, we're going to think about trying to work on these things and trying to make a difference to the air quality in that neighborhood. And the other one, LRAPA, is the Lane Region Air Pollution Authority, which is this sort of local agency down in Eugene that has this air quality role. And they've had this great program of, they got some money from EPA and from other folks, and they've had this great program of providing trucking fleets with APUs, which are alternative power units. And what they do basically is prevent the truck from needing to idle overnight for heat or for power to power the refrigeration or whatever if they need to. And they have this power unit that sits on the side of the cab, and it's a generator. It uses gasoline or diesel, but it's much more efficient than running the engine. So they provide those units to the trucking fleets, and then over 60 months, the trucking fleets pay back they pay for that unit through the savings that they have on their diesel fuel, because they're not using as much fuel because they're not idling. And so they've got this sort of revolving loan thing going, and they want to expand the program. So we're working with our RAPA. We have what we call the Oregon Transportation Infrastructure Bank, which is kind of a fund that we have for loaning money for infrastructure improvements. And we're looking into using that to help El RAPA expand the program and really expand that to a sort of tri-state initiative. They're talking to California, they're talking to Washington, and it can have huge impacts on diesel emissions on the I-5 corridor because just cutting down on the idling. It's really a great program. So hopefully in the coming months we'll see some announcements about that, and they'll really get that program rolling, and it'll really get a lot the publicity that it deserves. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the program I'm developing. This is kind of the dry process-related side of what I do. The fun projects is kind of the sexy, interesting stuff, and reducing emissions or doing a green building or something is what people are actually interested in. But the approach we're trying to take with developing the program since I started is to do the program development, the sort of process stuff, focus on that for the first few years, institutionalize sustainability a little bit, do things like getting training programs in place, getting an oversight group or a committee in place, getting some performance measures down, writing some goals and getting some results. So that stuff is really key, instead of just running out and trying to do projects here and there which have an impact, but maybe over time you lose track of what you've worked on or what's the most effective sort of project to focus on. So the program characteristics for this sustainability program that we're developing within ODOT, we talked about this a little bit earlier, but it's internal and it's external. So what I mean by that, it's certainly, we certainly have a role in this sort of internal support functions, our buildings or our fleet or our recycling or our energy use or paper use or whatever. Certainly have to look at that. But also it's trying to incorporate sustainability into our mission-related activities, so into the highway system or into the stuff that DMV does or into our grants that we administer for transit. So all of the different things we do, thinking about how sustainability relates to those. And so obviously that means it's cross-divisional. It relates to each of the divisions within ODOT. It's really a program that we're trying to integrate into existing policies and practices, something that we're trying to get, as well as having that leadership support, get the ground level support from folks out there and have that kind of bottom-up, top-down success, which I think is key when you're trying to do something like incorporate sustainability, which is inherently this kind of organizational change. It's a new cultural change for the organization. So my role, I manage the overall program, and I sort of coordinate individual initiatives. I don't really necessarily run, a specific project here and there, but I coordinate the overall direction and make sure that we can report what we're doing to the Governor's Office or to the Oregon Sustainability Board, and we're meeting those reporting obligations, but just kind of take the program management perspective rather than the individual projects we're working on. But that said, obviously I am a resources staff. I get involved in the projects. I was involved in the building renovation study because I have a little bit of a background in green building, and just trying to be a resource and make sure that folks get information that they need. So just really quickly, I won't go through this in depth, but this is the sort of schedule of what we're doing in the program development. We've done this series of stakeholder engagement interviews. So we talked to about 30 or 40 key folks in the department, everyone from a member of the Oregon Transportation Commission and the director down, and just kind of said, what do you want? What are you looking for? What are your needs? What are your expectations? What are the existing programs we need to tie into? And took all that information and kind of said, okay, this is what we're going to do. One of the key things that came from that was people want a way to talk about sustainability that's tangible. Matt Garrett said to me, I buy into sustainability, I know what it is, it's a good concept, but I need to know how to talk about it in a tangible way to people and not just kind of have this philosophical, meeting current needs, future needs kind of thing. So that was something that we started working on immediately after the interviews and developing those key messages. We're also working on developing some training materials, so whether it's new staff coming into the department or just a regular training schedule, we do some training and we make sure people are aware of sustainability and then make sure they know those tangible things that they can do in their job. While we're doing this program development, which is this kind of dry, boring process stuff, we also want to make sure we keep getting those success stories from the things that are actually making a difference. So I've got 4 or 5 things that I'm working on the side. I'm going to start working on to make sure that I'm not just in the department for 2 years or whatever, and then no one actually thinks that there's any results from it because I've been working on the program development. So just some things that we can say to Bill Bradbury at the Oregon Sustainability Board meetings. Yeah, we did this, and these were the results. I think that's really important. We're developing some performance measures, some indicators, which is a huge challenge. How do you measure sustainability in ODOT? There's work done internationally and nationally on sustainable transportation indicators, but it's hard to figure out how to work on those. Benchmarking, making sure we know what other countries and other departments are doing, and taking the best stuff that's going on. We'll have some kind of oversight group, some kind of committee, and then in the future we'll replace that existing 2004 sustainability plan with the new generation. And what we're probably going to do is have some kind of trio of documents. We'll have a kind of a multi-year sustainability sort of strategic plan, and then that'll sort of set the stage, and then every year we'll have an annual work plan and say, okay, we're going to work on these 10 things this year. And at the end of the year, we'll evaluate them. Okay, we did these 10 things. How well did we do? If we spent money, was the money efficiently used? What kind of fiscal impact did it have? Just so it's transparent, people know what we're working on, and they know the direction we're going on as well. And then the communication piece is really important. It's, sustainability is all about getting the message out, making sure people are educated, that they don't think that it's just some kind of tree hugger thing, that we just want to go out and save the salmon. Obviously that's part of it, but really sustainability is about making good decisions, and there's inherently trade-offs. Things have to be traded off. If it costs more to protect a species, then That's a trade-off. Do we spend the money or do we let the species be impacted? So sustainability is all about that kind of making sure folks have the information and that broader set of information than they may have traditionally had so they can make good decisions. So communications are important, so we're going to have a website. We'll have some kind of suggestion scheme so that the guys out on the ground, out in the field that are the experts in what they do, the guy that's out there driving the piece of equipment that plows the road or whatever, he's the expert in that job. I don't have any idea about that. He's got probably great ideas about things that could happen in his world. So having some kind of way for the communication to flow back and forth about what opportunities are out there is really important. I'm doing a lot of speaking to folks, brown bags presentations, making sure people know what's going on with the program, and we have this internal newsletter inside ODOT, and we're making sure that we're getting articles and things in there and letting folks know what's going on. So it's 1:10. I'm just going to talk briefly. This is kind of the key message stuff that we've developed to respond to that challenge of, okay, how do we articulate sustainability for ODOT? Really providing the sort of mental framework for people to put the pieces together of how it can be worked on. So at ODOT, we want employees to think about sustainability with regard to 3 key areas: access, activities, and assets. So what do we mean by those things? Well, access is this sort of big picture quality of life piece. We need to support access to a number of things. We need to provide access to a decent quality of life so that people can reach those desired goods, services, activities, destinations, whatever they may be. We also need to facilitate access to modal choice, make sure people have modal choice. We need to support access to livable communities so that the communities that people live in are vibrant and functioning. Ensuring that people can continue to access healthy places by making sure that when we do transportation work that we protect air, water, land, wildlife, and botanical resources. Making sure that we help maintain access to markets by making sure freight mobility continues to be functioning, and so that freight can have access to markets and there's economic prosperity. And making sure that we do all this equitably, so we support access for all people, regardless of any kind of group that they may belong to, and that all people have the same level of access. And making sure that we do that into the future for generations to come. So that's kind of the challenge we have, the charge that we have. And this is really kind of hot off the press. And it's if you talk to ODOT folks, they won't know this yet because we're just in the early days of rolling it out. But this is that tack we're trying to take to explain how sustainability relates to ODOT. So that's the access piece. And in meeting these needs, the challenges that we face can be overcome, or at least be tackled by managing our activities and our assets. So our activities, every activity that an ODOT employee undertakes can contribute to sustainability goals. So everyone has a piece to play in this, whether they're office activities, planning, design, administration, things like budgeting, or even support function activities like printing or whatever. Field activities, the guys out on the ground maintaining and operating the system, or external activities, for example, how we interact with the construction community, or how we interact with the public during the public involvement process. So all those activities have an impact. And activities that are occurring that we're doing on and on and on, or that have an impact across the entire system, are especially important for us to look at. And we need to consider all of the impacts of our activities, the economic impacts, the environmental impacts, and the social impacts. And we need to consider this full life cycle, so not just the initial phase, but the use phase and the disposal phase. That's kind of what we're thinking about when we're talking about managing our activities well. And then our assets. Our assets are all the different parts of the transportation system. So whether that's kind of the hard assets like roads or bridges or guardrails, whatever they are, or whether they're more of the sort of support assets like equipment or buildings, maybe even the data that we use, our IT data, or they may be soft resources like roadside areas, landscapes, or water systems, that kind of thing. So you can define assets a lot of different ways. And when we're thinking about our assets, we need to do a number of things. We need to manage them with this life cycle perspective, thinking about those different phases of the life. We have to develop assets that continue to improve safety, that safety goal. We have to build assets that are durable and have a low impact. And that's important, that durability piece. If we build something that it has a low impact that's benign and it lasts for 50 years instead of 20 years, then you don't have to come back in that repeating fashion and have that impact in that local area. Building assets that are sensitive to communities and ecosystems, assets that communities need and that ecosystems that don't impact adversely the ecosystems that they're located in. Maintaining assets, so not just building them, but then how we look after them, maintaining them in a way that is compatible with the natural habitats and species that are around them, and that even maybe use them, like bats, use our bridges. Designing and constructing assets so that they're reducing the demand for energy, for raw materials, and demand and the production of waste during the construction. Developing assets that have that multimodal aspect, making sure that we serve all of the modes. And preserving and optimizing our assets once they're built, making sure that we look after them well and that we preserve them and optimize their use efficiently over their lifetime, either through efficient operations or through the investment decisions we make to maintain them. So that's the tack we take. That's the kind of key message that we've developed that's hopefully going to resonate with people a little bit. Access, activities, and assets. And that hopefully does reflect that cross-divisional goal, because that's not just relevant to highway, but it's also relevant to other divisions. Those terms have meaning for other divisions that they can relate to. So we kind of sum up with a phrase: sustaining access for future generations through careful management of our activities and assets. So to sum up what I've talked about today, kind of provided a general overview of sustainability, what it means in a general sense, how it relates to transportation, and then talked about why sustainability is important to ODOT, why we're trying to incorporate it into what we do, describing some of the work we've done to date, some of the projects we've done, and I talked a little bit about the program that we're developing and what the different elements of that program are. So at that, that's all I have, and certainly have time to take some questions or to have a discussion or to get your thoughts and input on that.
I will first, I'll remind people again to use the microphones, and I have to apologize. I turned my computer on late, and there were a couple people who were watching who wanted to add to the list, so if they're still watching, I apologize. And and just to be thorough, those two items were traveler information and alternative fuels to add to the list.
Great. Yeah.
With me?
Yep.
Okay, maybe this is kind of slightly outside the scope of your talk, but you didn't touch on really kind of on the supply side of energy sources, basically to limit. And how do you reconcile sustainability with basically the current federal policies, both related to, for example, offshore drilling, and drilling in Alaska, and also the foreign policy, which is based on securing oil supplies?
Well, I guess the heart of that question is really what's ODOT's role in all of this? And something I've been witnessing since I've been there is that I think what we're going through right now is sort of a change in our role from an agency that essentially just builds roads and then lets people go use them to an agency that's the entity that's responsible for transportation in the state. And as such, we have a role in this alternative fuels discussion or this global warming discussion that we may not, have experience in talking about. So, yeah, I don't know what our our interaction with the federal government or national energy security is. But as at a state level, we're having that discussion about alternative fuels more and more, both internally in the fuels we use in the department, but also in the future and what's coming in the future and what's ODOT's role in that conversation, things that are happening. A couple of weeks ago, Jim Weddy spoke about this, his work in the Office of Alternative or Innovative Partnerships and this Road User Fee Task Force initiative that is thinking about, okay, in the future, if we're getting high efficiency vehicles or vehicles that aren't running on gasoline but they're running on something else, how do we get revenue from that? So that's really a key part of it. But I think our leadership is going to become more and more involved in that conversation, and we're going to have to be comfortable talking about it and figuring out what our positions are and what we're advocating for. And we are already doing that. In this Oregon Transportation Plan update that's happening that you may have, I think, heard about in a previous seminar, there is language about encouraging alternative fuels, about energy security, about contingency planning for shortages, that kind of thing. So we're getting there, and we're starting to talk about it. Yeah, gray shirt.
Does ODOT have any renewable energy or alternative fuel portfolio? And if so, what are the goals and standards for those different categories? And where do the current levels, like you mentioned, 7% biodiesel, where do those current levels fall in line with those future goals?
So for our fleet or just our overall energy use?
For your fleet vehicles and then also your building energy use.
And by portfolio, you mean like a
certain level, for example, like a percentage of renewable energy that you're looking to purchase, or a percentage of your vehicles that you are looking to have run on alternative fuels? Yeah, so
we're working towards the governor's goals, and for example, for biodiesel for B20 use, that is 10% of our diesel use, our total diesel use should be B20, biodiesel 20% blend by July 2007, and 25% to be B20 by July 2010. And we're on track to meet those. Like I said, right now we're about 7%. There's similar goals for ethanol. I'm not sure if there's goals for hybrid vehicles or not. So we have those goals, and obviously, as those percents increase, right now, for example, biodiesel is a developing market. It's not a mature industry right now, and so there is that kind of interplay between supply and demand and the availability of those fuels. So that goal of, say, 25% by 2010 really, depending on how the market grows and develops, will depend on how readily we meet that or by how much we exceed it. And part of the idea behind setting goals for agencies, for example, for biodiesel use, is to provide some of that demand to the industry and help incubate that developing industry. Yeah?
I imagine that working for a state agency, there's a lot of rules and regulations that you guys have to follow or that are institutionalized that seem to be potentially serious barriers to achieving sustainability. And I know that you guys have like a qualified products list, and I'm sure you have ways that you maintain and build roads that are kind of codified. So I'm wondering how the sustainability plan is kind of addressing this. And maybe you talked about that's like organizational change, but how are you addressing or identifying the barriers, and how do you see the plan kind of affecting current operation?
Well, I guess that's kind of the piece that's starting to actually work on the projects and work on initiatives. And so an initiative might be, okay, let's look at our qualified products list and see what's in there that's good, what's in there that can be improved. So I'm trying not to get too heavily involved in that right now, in that jumping into those kinds of things, because we're trying to develop the program piece. But yeah, there's all kinds of standards. We have policy. I mean, there's policies, there's guidelines, there's rules, there's lists, there's standards, we have specs, and each of those have opportunities and procurement's another thing. We have contracts for the stuff we buy, and there's a big opportunity there. When we let a contract for construction or for design of the facility or whatever, that administering that contract, we have certain amount of power to require certain things of contractors or consultants, and so that's a huge opportunity for us. But I haven't done a lot of work in that as yet.
I have some questions from the web. I'm going to jump in here because my battery on my laptop's going to die soon, so I want to make sure I ask them. A couple of them are related, so I'll try to combine them, and that's how do you work with agencies like Metros or a regional agency that has compatible goals with the sustainability, and how do you share, and even further down to like local and municipal governments and public works departments and places like that? How does maybe some of this that you do transfer down? Or
Well, I guess the interaction happens in different places, and something that springs to mind is the OTP, Oregon Transportation Plan, update process, and the stakeholders they have involved, and the outreach they do to those local agencies. They have folks on the committees from the local agencies, and then when the draft document went out for public review, they got comments from all those local agencies. So a lot of it happens through things like that. The other thing that brings to mind for me is that the sustainability program is just me developing it, and I don't have a huge budget. I don't have a staff, and so and it's a huge it's a huge challenge and opportunity, and so you just kind of prioritize about what you work on and what you do, and also you let other people in the agency that are experts in what they do continue to do their job and just kind of be a resource to them. We have environmental staff. We have folks that have worked on environmental work. We have people that interact with local agencies, and so they're all doing their job. And a lot of those pieces of the puzzle contribute to our sustainability footprint or initiative or whatever. And so over time, I'd get involved with those people and see what's going on, see what they're doing. But myself am not doing a lot of outreach to other local agencies, other than learning from what other entities may have done in their own sustainability initiatives. So, yeah.
I was wondering how many other people were helping to rewrite the Oregon Sustainability Plan. Are you kind of the major person on that?
The sustainability plan for ODOT? Yeah. The plan, the way we're going to do that right now, what we're thinking is, I'll sort of write an outline draft document, and then once we develop this sort of oversight group, it'll go through that group for review and for acceptance, and then we'll obviously do some outreach internally and run it by folks and make sure that things are sounding good to people. And we're kind of right in the middle of that right now, with that update. We were going to start working on the performance measures and trying to figure out the indicators. That was kind of the next thing after the stakeholder engagement and developing those key messages. The next big piece of the puzzle was the performance measurement piece, but we realized that we shouldn't just develop a load of performance measures. We should have our plan in place and have some goals and some objectives that we're working towards, and the performance measures should reflect back on those goals or those strategies. So we've kind of fiddle around with the schedule, so we're going to get that draft plan written and in place, use that to develop the performance measures, and then before that kind of gets all finalized, we'll run it by people internally. There was one, at the back.
In light of declining gas tax revenue, what mechanisms is ODOT looking towards to help shore up funding issues?
Say that again, repeat the question for me.
In light of the declining gas tax revenues that ODOT depends upon, what mechanisms is ODOT looking at to help shore up funding issues in the future?
Well, the one thing that's happening, that's it, sort of ongoing through Jim Whitty's work in the Office of Innovative Partnerships is this road user fee task force. and looking at, right now there's this pilot program where they're looking at, okay, how do we collect revenues based on a mileage fee instead of based on, per gallon charge. So that's kind of the long-term thing, depending on the results of the pilot, and then, the next phase of the pilot, and then public acceptance, and then on and on and on. Maybe in some amount of time, 10 or 20 years, we transition over to a mileage-based revenue collection instead of a per-gallon revenue collection. But that's obviously, a ways out there. In the meantime, the approach that's being taken as the Oregon Transportation Plan has been written is to say, okay, let's just be honest with the citizens and with the legislature and say, this is where the gas tax is at. It hasn't been increased for however many years, and this is what that money can buy, and it's at this level. And if we're consciously making a decision as a state that that's what we want our transportation investments to be, then okay, well, we have to start prioritizing. Where do we prioritize that money to be spent, and what parts of the system, what part of this asset that we're responsible for are we potentially going to let decline because we don't have the revenue for it. Alternatively, there might be a higher scenario level of funding that would allow us to do this much, or an ideal level of funding that would allow us to do this much. But just instead of going to the legislature and saying we need this much money, going to the legislature and the public and saying, this is how much we can buy right now, this is how much we can buy at this level, this is how much we can buy at this level, what do you guys want to spend? That's kind of the tack we're taking. Yeah.
In addition to miles travel taxes, are you looking at anything like Seattle is looking at with congestion-based user fees or toll roads to make people realize that roads aren't free?
Well, just before I answer that, a caveat is that tolling is a controversial issue, and I'm not an expert in what's going on or what we're looking at. So if I missed anything, you'll have to scratch it from the public record and not hold it against me. But yeah, we're looking at tolling on a number of projects that are coming up, and it's sort of, my understanding is that it's explicitly related to new buildings. So I don't think at this point we're looking at tolling of existing facilities, but I'm not 100% sure about that. But that is something that we would be potentially looking at on certain new facilities. And part of this advance of technology that's being used for the Road User Fee Task Force work, this vehicle mileage-based tax, that technology gives you the opportunity to potentially use that for peak period pricing type pricing. So, but like I said, there's just the mileage fee task force thing is just a pilot phase at this point in time. And the tolling or other alternative revenue collection streams like that are it's kind of being investigated for a number of new facilities, but we haven't got any firm plans in place.
Prerogative and squeeze in here and then turn off my computer. A question from our web viewer. You mentioned that the reauthorization of the Oregon Sustainability Act directed agencies to work with private sector partners to further promote sustainability. Can you give an example of how ODOT has done this or how they plan to, the working?
Well, the new executive order, actually what it did was it just, the main private sector piece of the new executive order was really having the Oregon Sustainability Board not focus so heavily on state agency operations, but also leverage their role and their experience and their knowledge and their position to also work with the private sector and with, say, the university system. So it was less about actually promoting this sort of public-private partnership, but that's a piece of it too, I guess. In terms of what the Oregon Sustainability Board now, this is separate from ODOT, is doing some, maybe more than it has in the past, with things like economic development or, maybe looking at certain industries like clean fuels industries or green building industries, that kind of thing, is some of the work that the Oregon Sustainability Board has done with the private sector.
I'm wondering, like when you contract out, like on the Bridge project, a lot of that work is contracted out. The requirements maybe when you're contracting out for sustainability.
Yeah, in the bridge program, there are. I mean, that's a huge program, and it's not something I've been involved with directly. But there's a number of things that are happening as part of that program, and the way that this context-sensitive and sustainable solutions approach is being taken, and the way things are contracted to require, for example, a CSQ plan of a contractor. So how are they going to respond to these certain pieces, whether it's economic stimulus or diversity or protection of natural environment, those different pieces, and there's requirements of the contractors to plan for that kind of thing. There's other things, like we have a fuel performance standard, so there's aspirational goals for contractors to meet for alternative fuel use or things like ultra-low sulfur diesel, so instead of just buying regular diesel, buying ultra-low sulfur diesel. Requirements on things like idling at the construction site, don't idle for more than, if you're going to be idling for more than 5 minutes, turn your engine off, that kind of thing. So, yeah, there's a lot of different pieces of the puzzle, and a lot of that work that we're doing with the private sector is happening in what's going on in the bridge program, and we'll take all the good stuff that's worked on that and the experience we've gained, and also the experience that the architectural and engineering community has gained by working on these projects, and transfer that to mainstream ODOT projects, so just the regular STIP cycle rather than just this special bridge program. So maybe one more, yeah.
Yeah, you talked about this quarter, you guys are working on something for quantifying the sustainability measures. Could you explain some of the things you've come up with so far?
Well, we have sort of basically just done some preliminary investigation so far, but kind of what are the focus areas that we want to address, whether it's materials use or energy use or recycling or internal employee-related stuff like diversity, or so just figuring out the different pieces of sustainability and then figuring out how to find indicators or measures for those. And some of that is easier than other pieces. We have performance measurement stuff going on in the department already for just, good management, having performance measures to figure out what we're doing, or for making sure we're getting our targets for, say, equal opportunity or whatever. We're measuring things already, and so what the sustainability program is going to do is tie into existing measures that are being done, and figuring out where we're lacking gaps and what else we need to measure to build more of a complete picture for sustainability.
And with that, we'll draw to an end. Before we thank our speaker, I will mention next week, and our final speaker of the academic year, Jonathan Mackler from the City of Portland and Metro, will be talking about planning for transportation operations in the Portland region. So thank you very much, Damon.
Thank you.